Good morning, Amrit. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for accepting my invite to be on Marketing Blueprint today. How are you today, my friend?
I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me here. This is the second time I've seen you in like 2 weeks, so this is it's a treat in many ways. Given that I used to be part of your team at one point in our career, and we would talk often. So this is a treat. So thank you for having me here.
Well, thanks a lot. We actually had a gap of like 3 years or 2 years without really talking. So super happy you reached out. Beside that, there is another reason why I wanted to invite you on the show, because you have, I think the word exceptional is probably the right one. You have a pretty exceptional background. That your career is what many people would envy. So what I traditionally do at Marketing Blueprint is I usually start with a brief recap of my guest's background. So if you don't mind, I'm going to start with this, and then you'll have a chance to correct me if I missed some important step there. You okay with that?
Absolutely. It's always fun chatting with you extempore. So go ahead.
So you actually started by working for about 3 years at Niku, doing what you said was whatever necessary to meet business requirements. Then you moved to a senior solutions architect at CA Technologies.
Yeah.
You've decided it was about time for you to become an entrepreneur for a couple of years in the consulting business. Then you went back to CA Technologies in a different function. This time you were senior director. It was already a specialty in SaaS, which I believe would be an important element for the rest of your career. You had a pretty short experience as a VP product at Cloud Cruisers before you decided to embrace both marketing and product at 𝗵𝗵 Softwares, and VP at Oracle, product marketing, and then CMO at RingCentral, CMO at 8x8, and then CGO, Chief Growth Officer, at C1. Is that a correct picture of your professional background?
So first of all, it's amazing that the when you describe it, because you forget about your journey sometimes. I'm like, oh, I did that. Yeah, I mean, so yes, that is accurate. It is. I will say, Julian, in my wildest dreams, when I was kind of growing up and kind of going to school, etc., I'd never imagined this path. Like never. But I am very fortunate and grateful that I landed where I landed, and the career journey which I took, and I kind of went with the flow. So, and here I am. So.
It's usually one of, I was not planning on asking this question today, but that's a question I ask very often. Was it your dream at some point in your childhood to be where you are at today? But that was not the case. It just happened this way, is what you're saying.
Yeah, no, if you had asked me, like, when I was growing up, yeah, I always thought I'd do something with music, or so I come from from a family, like, on my paternal side of the family, they're musicians. My mother was classically trained, so as a musician, and I thought that's the path I would take. And in my family, you didn't. I grew up at a time where you couldn't decide what you wanted to do. It was decided for you. For us, for me, academics and music were equally important. And in in the maternal side of the family, including my mother, there was a lot of doctors. So I was given a choice of whether to become a doctor or an engineer, and I chose to be an engineer. But even when I was going through engineering school, in my wildest dreams, I had never imagined that I would end up as a CMO, and kind of be in this part of the kind of the functional kind of category to kind of go to market and run kind of marketing, etc. So
Actually, you started as an engineer. You started on the product side of things. Then you embraced product marketing. That led to marketing. That led to CMO. That led to growth, which is which has much more functions, because you ended up having most of the company's function reporting into you. Was it like? Would you say that was like a natural evolution? Like it could happen to anyone starting their career in product, or it's just you had all the planets aligning at the right time and you've been lucky enough, but that's not something that's so easy to reproduce?
No, I think it's a mixture of both. Prior to Niku, Niku was a fantastic experience for me. But prior to Niku, I was at a company called 𝗪𝗶𝗹𝗶, where I was kind of an applications engineer. It was a long time ago. I'd moved to the Silicon Valley, and at that time, they didn't have a lot of customer facing people, and I was part of the engineering team. I was given an opportunity because of specific product issues at the time to kind of interface with customers, to kind of drive roadmap, etc., etc. And when I got the opportunity and I started talking to customers, started talking to people software was developed for, because you would kind of sit in I should say you would sit in a dark room and code all day, but you didn't really interface, at least when I started out my career, much with the folks who actually used your software. So when I got the opportunity to talk to these people and shape product roadmap, etc., that just kind of opened me up in a way where I started to see the world differently. And so from engineering, as you correctly said, I enjoyed my path into product, shaping product roadmap. And that led me to Niku, where I did a whole bunch of things, pre-sales, post-sales, implementation, kind of shaping software. And I also came back when I left and did some consulting, and then came back because I had a phenomenal boss, Jules Ehrlich, this amazing South African man, who gave me the opportunity to shape CA's kind of SaaS and cloud journey initially back in like 2008, 2009, when people didn't even use the word SaaS. It used to be called the ASP model or the hosted model. So I had the opportunity to shape product. And then as I was kind of doing that, what I really found was my calling was in, how do you kind of message product? How do you price and package product? How do you figure out what segments of the market to go after? How do you take different sales motions and bring them together? And so that got me naturally into product marketing. And so it wasn't something which I had thought that, I didn't even know that, starting out in engineering, that these were the functional boundaries for each one of these kind of different jobs. But it just happened, and I feel like lucky, to answer your question, that I was in the right place at the right time. And I also had the appetite to kind of go learn those functions. And the more I did, the more customer facing, the more outside in I became, as opposed to inside out from a product perspective. And that led me to product marketing, and then, then to CMO. But even that, you followed, this better than most people. It's rare for product people to become CMOs, because at least here in tech, for the most part, a CMO either comes from a brand and comms background, or they come from a demand gen background.
Demand
right?
gen, exactly.
So I was lucky in many ways, but I also had the path and the appetite to kind of explore those avenues. So
you started your career in a dark room somewhere in the underground, not talking to anyone. And a few years later, you started having people interaction, customer interaction. And a few years later, in your journey, you started having execs interaction, which is an entirely different beast altogether. And I don't know if you remember that, but one of our first, probably our first interaction, I doubt you'd remember that, but one of our first interactions, we just had the acquisition of the company I was working for. And you were pretty new at RingCentral at the time, I believe.
I think I was less than a month old at RingCentral at the time.
Exactly. That's how I remember it. And one of our first interaction was trying to build a deck together to explain an incredibly complex product to execs in a way where they would understand what the product does, what it cannot do, how to position it, what the GTM should be, and basically how do we integrate all these pieces together. And we had to go through rounds and rounds and rounds because you had that sense that you have to explain it as if you were explaining it to a 4-year-old, not because they don't have the knowledge, but because they just don't have the patience. You have to go straight to the fact. And is that a super important skill to be able to vulgarize, to be able to simplify? Is that a super important skill to get in your shoes today to grow your marketing career?
Absolutely. And if I remember what I told you back then, I think I'd said to you that some of the people who we are presenting have the attention span of a 2-year-old dog. So, it is an incredible I think it is a skill which you acquire. The further you go up the ladder and you are presenting to boards, to exec teams, you've got to summarize and get you start with the so what before you even describe what you're trying to do. And because otherwise, some of these people are so busy, and I'm not saying this in the pejorative. I mean, some of the people you're presenting are extremely smart people, but they're dealing with 500 plus very important initiatives. So if you don't drive your initiative home in a very crisp and clear way right up front, you don't get much. But it's a skill I learned. It's not something which you learn growing up. It's how you watch and learn others in front, who come ahead of you kind of, do, and then you pick up from there. I learned some of that at CA, because when I was kind of running the product team for their SaaS business, we would have, be invited to present to the exec leadership team there. This is the team which kind of, all of this was acquired by Broadcom, but you had to present you had half an hour to present your initiatives. And typically you started out with a 50+ page deck, which you had to coalesce into 2 or 3 slides. So yeah, it's a skill. And then what shaped me, honestly, I would say, is I would give a lot of the credit to my time at Oracle, because Oracle is a machine when it comes to go-to-market, and it's a great place for people to learn scale, because I'm not saying Oracle's the only one. I mean, there are other companies like SAP, and Salesforce does an amazing job. But that philosophy of how you drive go-to-market as a machine, where from product inception to how you take it to market, it just becomes, if you are exposed to that scale, and when you're running those motions, if you're running a motion which goes across, say, 10,000 salespeople just in North America, you have to do it in a way where it's thought through and it scales. So those are things which you learn, and Oracle really gave me that platform to kind of really shape it and kind of hone in on that scale. So
Oracle also taught you how to grow a beautiful beard, so we are all thankful for that. Jokes aside,
it was only because I used to at Oracle. I'm glad that you're calling it out. At Oracle, when I would come in and present, I felt like I was a child with all of these people in the room. So to to literally show some maturity, I had to grow some facial hair.
So maturity is a good point. You don't have to be a CMO to be exposed to executives. And it can be pretty overwhelming, can be pretty scary for marketers who have not yet had that, that relationship with execs, that you need to present something tomorrow. That's scary. Anyone who spent more than 30 seconds in a room with you knows that you have an incredibly high EQ. So it feels easy. You feel confident. You give that feeling that it's easy, and it's not. But you give that perception that it's easy. How do you get there? How do you go beyond being scared? How do you build that confidence? Because not everyone can grow a beard. There must be another way.
No, look, you've got to realize that this is a team sport early on, and that's thank you for the comment about EQ. But when you are kind of presenting in front of a lot of execs, you are presenting work which goes, which has been handled by hundreds of people sometimes, in terms of, how it has been shaped. So because it's such a team sport, you don't, it's not an individual. The minute you start thinking about, how you are going to come across, is where I feel like you start losing the plot. You've got to think about the initiative. You've got to think about the core people who are creating the initiative, and you've got to think about how, your drive, what was the intent behind the initiative when it was formed, and how it gets shaped along the way. So if you are working with that team, as long as you get the input from the team, where you are able to shape the narrative together, and make sure that you socialized it over and over and over with other execs and gotten feedback. That's what really shapes these narratives, and that's how you come across as as mature. That's how you come across as succinct, because if you've just presented and surprised people the first time around without having any feedback, sometimes you do get lucky. Look, you're thinking out of the box and you do something really, really, disruptive. And, we've all done that in our careers, and it goes, but that doesn't drive, your success in overall. I feel like when you run with the pack, and you are able to kind of shape things together, that's what drives success. At least that's what's helped me. And I've had, even including us, you and I together, a lot of our success at RingCentral during the the early days when we worked together was because of the team we built. And so.
I really love that you talk about the team a lot, because anywhere you go in the world, I believe there are very few countries where you would fly and not know someone you could have lunch with, because you've worked with people all over the world, and you've created good relationships with people, which is more important. Because I know people in many countries. I'm not sure I would go lunch with people in many countries. I think this is a fantastic skill, to be able to build a network, to keep in touch with people. That's fantastic, because that might help you land your next job. That might help you find the right people for your next company when you need to start hiring. That might be your next customer. I mean, there are a million good reasons for having that network. Is building a network something that, first, is it very important for your career? And second, to you specifically, does it just come naturally, or is it actually an effort because it's going to have so many virtues that you actually need to get outside of your comfort zone to build that network, because that's an important component of your career building effort?
I would say, for me, it was conditioned reflex. I had to work on it. It does happen a lot more naturally now, in my, where I am today. But I think I realized early on, like I said, that, you kind of rise and kind of fail together. So when I see people, I rate them on kind of three parameters or three core axes, if you can call it that. The first two are common, which is skill and will, right? So I believe that as humans, we can be taught any skill, and if we especially if we have the right wills, the will becomes very, very important. So if I just was focusing on skill and will, I always love to work with and learn from people who had incredible will, and will is what drives you to do things which are unnatural, drives you to do things which normally you would kind of shy away from, right? But the third piece to me in all of this is, even if you learn skill and even if you have the right will, sometimes you get stuck after a certain point. And that's where the third axis comes in, which is what I call potential, where even if you have the will to do things, unless you're working on increasing your aperture and driving that potential to kind of get to that next level, you kind of stagnate after a certain period of time. And so I've always worked very hard to kind of identify these skills, both, being self-observant about and self-aware about where I rank in it there. And then when I meet people, my natural instinct is to follow and see where they are going. And when I find that there is a match, I absolutely make an effort to make sure that I stay connected. And I more than I would believe, I'll say this, I have learned more from people who worked in my teams than the people I've worked for. I've worked a ton, I've learned a lot from people I work for. But you talked about that people piece. Like, one of my favorite bosses, who 𝗪𝗵𝗶𝘁, who I worked for twice, he would call me the man of the people, and it was only because I would go, when we worked together, there was no hierarchy. I didn't believe in it. I believed, we have, at one point we had even at Ring Central, we had a 400-500 people organization across different functions, but there was no hierarchy. When I would communicate on a weekly basis, it wasn't like other people reporting their work to me at the time. It was me reporting what I wanted, the vision and the direction, to the team, so that we could kind of be cohesive and be one unit. And I feel like if you are doing that multiple levels below you, multiple levels above you, then you just create that glue where people understand your vision. And also, if they don't believe in it, they will come at you much earlier, which helps you kind of shape your direction. So
and listening to you, actually, if you allow me to put my shrink hat on, it does feel like, because you care about your people, because you work very hard with them, because it's like going to battle together, you have that we've been to war together feeling, where you kind of keep the relationship afterwards, because it was not a work relationship, it was a working together relationship. That's a team spirit. And I completely feel what you're saying. You have that amazing communication skill that keeps people around you, make them feel they belong, and that's probably incredibly important when you want to build a team spirit. Shifting to a completely different topic, because you've worked in so many different companies. You've worked in smaller companies, you've worked at Oracle, you've worked in all shapes and forms. Nowadays, especially for someone like you, working in California, Silicon Valley, there is all these startups. And very often, as a fresh grad, as a new or fresh marketer, you're wondering, should I go with the well-established company where I may not have such a big impact? I might be just, be in that tiny cell, but I have a career ahead of me? Or should I go with that sexy startup that's going to allow me to do 5 million things more than what's on the job description, and it's going to promise me a lot of extra stocks that may or may not come to fruition at the end of the day? What is a right path when you want to be in the CMO shoes at some point? Is there a preferred path? Does it depend on who you are? What's your recommendation here?
Yeah, that's a good question, Julian. I mean, first of all, like you and I have talked about before, the CMO as a role is completely changing. I mean, there is the CMO in a traditional sense, the way we, it used to be in the last 5-10 years from now is very different than what it is today. And I think, depending on the go-to-market for a company, like, for example, if a company is very product-led, growth-oriented, it's a very PLG growth-oriented motion versus a large enterprise company, which is kind of, very field marketing and kind of, account-based marketing driven motions versus kind of a completely e-commerce, company. But to come back to your question, right? If somebody's starting out, my advice, I personally think my advice would be find a startups give you in my opinion, give you a lot of opportunity to and expose you to things which you would not be in a large company if you started off in a large company. I feel like startups give you that skill where you can go across and do many things. I gave an example of when I started out, in engineering. I got the opportunity to be in a customer-facing role because I was part of a small company where resources were always hard to come by. So I was put in a customer-facing role. I got the exposure. One of another example I'll give you something which we both know. There was a lady at Oracle who was part of the BDR SDR function, but she started to stagnate. At Oracle, she was just doing calling. She came to RingCentral in a BDR SDR capacity, but at the time she had very specific opinions about the pitches which she was doing to the prospects and the customers, and she was so opinionated that she started writing some of those scripts herself. And obviously then she, initially she just went rogue and did it herself. Then she started talking to the product marketing team. The product marketing team brought some of those things to me, and I actually loved her ideas. But because we were a much smaller company compared to an Oracle, we were able to give her the opportunity to say, hey, if you have very specific thoughts about, how to shape the narrative, come join the team and shape the narrative. And then, she's had a very successful career since then, where she has shaped, been part of product marketing teams. And so I feel like that exposure to a breadth of functions happens quicker in a startup initially. But then once you've got that experience, if you go to a bigger company, the bigger company teaches you scale, because in a small company, what you're doing is not necessarily repeatable, and you can't rinse and repeat. At a bigger company, you have to be able to rinse and repeat, because otherwise it just doesn't scale. Like, you can't say, hey, you know what, I'm going to run one. I think this sales motion is going to work because of what I've seen one customer do, and let's just go run a motion. You have to make sure you look at all the accounts you go after, you look at the average deal size, propensity to buy, all of that stuff, right? So that gets taught at a bigger company. So I remember at least at some of the bigger companies, including CA, where you brought in a really creative guy who was kind of just doing messaging, And then they started getting exposure to the operational parts of the business, which is the accounts, the deal sizes. Then it clicks on, oh, how do I create content which can go generate pipeline in a specific way? And that combination of a small and a big company is what shapes you, I feel. But I feel like if you start small, go big, then you can come back to small and you can do a lot more because you have that exposure. I feel like the reason I was successful at RingCentral, we were initially, was because I knew how scale worked at Oracle, which was very, at the time needed at RingCentral. And so
one thing I will remember from what you said, though, that was just in the first few words, but it struck me. The CMO role in the next few years may not exist, at least as it exists today, because of the complexity and the new roles and how organizations are being shaped right now. So I may have to change my podcast at some point. I'll invite you to the next version, which is CMOs who actually wanted to be singers or music players. I already have a few guests in mind, so I'll have you on that one. We're almost at time, but I have one more question for you in just a few words. If you were to meet a fresh grad who's just starting a marketing career today, you've already given plenty of elements around starting a startup, continuing a larger company, around work on your network, work on your ability to simplify things and synthesize things. And what would be your best piece of advice? Is there something else you'd like to add for people starting their career today?
Yeah, look, marketing. I say this as a joke to a lot of the folks in my teams. Marketing in the 1800s was an art. Marketing today is more science than it is art. And so if my advice to anybody who wants to have a career in marketing is make sure the creativity doesn't die within you. So you've got to be creative. But ground your creativity in numbers. So if whatever you're starting, if you're starting in a small company and you want to run specific campaigns, motions, etc., you find out what the world looks like for you. Then you can, the trick is always to be focused and and be targeted. When you're targeted, you drive success. So depending on what you're in, if you want a career in demand gen, learn what the world looks like so that you can tweak the knobs to really, really be successful. If you're in content, create content and make sure that you're targeting for the right set of people, the right audiences. If you're in sales enablement, make sure your narrative by seller type, whether it's a BDR or an account rep or a VP of sales, is tight. So that's what I would recommend. And the more you get exposed to the broader parts of the business, take that initiative to learn more. Sit with operations teams, sit with sales teams, sit with product teams. If you do that, it makes you a better, well-rounded kind of marketer. That's my advice.
So you don't have to start as an engineer, but you gotta have some of the scientist skills at some point, because that's gonna help you along the way. And you have to speak. That's something I like about what you said, is also you have to speak the right language, because at some point, if you are talking to execs, it's not just about your role, it's about the big picture, and understanding the big picture, understanding the numbers, understanding the language is incredibly important. Well, Amrit, that was not too much of a surprise, but that was inspiring. I expected that. I got exactly what I paid for. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, everyone, for watching today's show. And I think we're going to have to do more of that. Not once every 3 years. We need to do this more often. A big thank you for joining.
I look forward to it. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. You've shaped my journey in many ways, more than you even know. But I'm glad that we connected, and I'm glad that we did this together. So thank you.
Thanks, Sam.